Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. That was a very... I'm sorry.
That was an epic intro is what it was.
Okay. It was an epic intro. So
very staccato.
Yeah, it was. It threw me off, actually. So, what are we talking about today?
Oh, we're talking about imposter syndrome.
Right. I was going to have this really elegant intro, but then your enthusiasm threw me. It was distracting.
It always is distracting.
Yeah. So, we're talking about imposter syndrome. And, okay, so this is born out of a Facebook Live. If you're on Facebook and you subscribe to Personality Hacker on Facebook, we do Facebook Lives on a semi-regular basis. I would say at least one a week, if not more than that. And recently, over the holiday season, I was thinking about this idea of how much we have whitewashed our heroes from the past. And this was born a little bit of a book I think I've mentioned on the podcast a couple times because I just thought it was a really good book. It's called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it's written by a history professor who was appalled at the lack of history knowledge that his college-age students came with from high school. So he went back and reviewed like 8 or 10 history books from the past and realized that the history books that, at least in the United States, our history in the United States, that the way that history books are written for for high school students is actually kind of appalling. And one of the major umbrages he took with them is how two-dimensional these history books make both heroes and villains. They whitewash history to a point where there's no complexity to the characters of our historical figures. They're two-dimensional. They're either all good or all bad. You know, you've got George Washington, who is all good, and you've got Benedict Arnold, the traitor who's all bad. And there's no idea that these people were just complex characters trying to figure it out.
Or they try to write in complexity and impropriety in almost a storybook way. Like there's this story about George Washington chopping down a cherry tree when he was a child and then lying to his father about it, but being found out, then having to confess. And so it was this whole it's an attempt to humanize him, but it's almost like this apocryphal story from his childhood. That's it reads like a storybook, like a put your daughter to bed at night storybook. It doesn't ring true, and it's all about something in his past before he became famous, about how he worked out all his character flaws back then when he was a child, and now he's almost perfect at this point.
Right. Was that George Washington or Abraham Lincoln?
That was George Washington.
Okay, I can't even remember it, so it's kind of a ridiculous childhood story. Like you said, it's an apocryphal tale.
I might even getting the details wrong. That's how childlike it is for me.
Right. He's like, I cannot tell a lie. I have to almost the fact that he had this integrity woven into him from childhood, and so now as an adult, he's this image of perfection. You're right. It's if they try to create a more complex figure, it's done in this very remains cartoonish two-dimensional way. So here we are, the complex human beings that we are, filled with good and bad and evil and truth and lies and everything in between, right? Because these aren't dichotomies. They're not switches we flip. It's not like one day we're a good person and one day we're a bad person. We have all of the spectrum inside of us. And we go, hey, I want to do something big. I want to play a bigger game. I want to go, be a servant to the world, and I want to give the world my gifts. And we start to head out into the world, and we see all of our imperfections, and we see all of the problems inside of us. And all of a sudden, in contrast with these epic figures, these epochs of humanity, this pantheon of gods that we've created for ourselves from the past, and founding fathers of whatever country you're in, or all these figures who were perfect up until the moment of their death, the Joan of Arc, etc. And we go, oh yeah, I'm kind of a loser in comparison to that. In fact, what am I even thinking? Why do I try? What is going on here? I'm kind of an idiot that makes a lot of mistakes every day, and I have icky feelings, and yesterday I was really happy that something bad happened to somebody I don't like, and I'm filled with Schadenfreude and like all these bad characteristics that every human being experiences. And then when we try to reach out for something big, all of a sudden we feel like we're imposters. Like we shouldn't, who am I to try to reach out for something better? Who am I trying to, to say that I'm a professional? Like, who am I to say that I'm a person other people should listen to? And I feel like a major piece of imposter syndrome is rested on this two-dimensional belief we have in anybody who's ever done anything good in the past. We have this idea that things should only ever be either good or bad. And if we don't fully represent one side of the aisle, then we have no business in stepping forward. And I think I know we're not supposed to talk about politics, so I'm not going to talk about politics. When I say not supposed to, I mean like we've tried to keep this podcast politically neutral if at all possible. But I will say the current social climate in the United States is not helping matters, in the sense that if somebody has something skeezy from their past come up, we annihilate them right now. Like we don't hold space. We don't go, did this person go through any sort of rehabilitation, or is this something from the past that was a mistake we can understand? We're right now in a time period of total annihilation for people who have made mistakes.
And that's stuff that happened in the past often that we don't have record of. Imagine going in the future when all of us, everything we do today is being recorded on everybody's phone device, security cameras, like everything is going to be digital and forever. And just imagine the same culture that's happening now at the time of this recording, continuing in 20 years from now, just how many people are going to have skeletons in their closet about stuff that they wouldn't be proud of at all. And I'm not talking about illegal stuff or really disgusting behavior. I'm just talking about things that are embarrassing or weird or different that come out, and it's going to be, everybody's going to have to deal with this in the future. It's going to be something that we're all going to have to face, when, whatever you've been doing is now released to the public at some point. Especially if you're trying to do something big in the world and you have some influence, the potential for you to have that exposed is high. So I think that's the case. And I think this one-dimensional thing you talked about with the people that we prop up as, heroes of the past or the recent past or whatever, I think we do the same thing for villains too. I think the people that we don't like from the past that we see there's no complexity to their character either. Like they're all evil, like, and I've got to be careful here, but like somebody like the figure of Hitler, obviously the man was very evil in what he put into a regime. Like there's a lot of evilness that came from the people he surrounded himself with and all of that. And does that mean that character, that person at the core of their being had zero redeeming qualities? And I don't mean that redeems them from the evil stuff they did, but if we only see people that are quote unquote villains in one dimension characters, we don't see the complexity of how all of us probably have the ability inside of us to do some really horrible things and to watch for those things. We're like, well, those are what evil people do, so I don't have to watch that in myself. I think that's really dangerous too, because now we blacklist those people. So we whitewash the heroes and we blacklist the villains, and now there's this dichotomy, and you're either in one camp or the other. There's no nuance, there's no complexity, there's no way of understanding yourself and making sure you don't go down that road, because it's like, well, that's what evil people do.
Yeah, well, this idea that, during the Nuremberg trials, it was like, well, I was just following orders, right? Like, I think what happens is if we see things in these two-dimensional ways, we actually end up handing ourselves over to authority figures. We don't make peace with ourselves and what we're capable of. And so when we are in a situation where that stuff can come out, we haven't, we'll say things like, well, I'm a good person, right? Like, I'm a good person, meaning that, like, therefore, if a opportunity shows itself that is ethically or morally complex, I will always default and choose the good option. Like, that's not how that works. Like, none of us will always default and choose the good option unless we've been doing, like, just basically sitting around and doing thought experiments constantly of every possible incarnation of opportunity to, like, make us have ethically complicated choices and have mentally prepared ourselves for literally everything. We will run into situations that will test us. And so this idea that if we run into situations that test us and may bring out the worst in us, then now we're disqualified ever from this point forward in stepping into a position of leadership or becoming somebody who can actually do good things for the world. I mean, I kind of have this inside me. One of my heroes is Mr. Rogers. And I see I see Mr. Rogers as just this paragon of virtue. I see him as like almost the perfection itself in how compassionate and kind he was. He's my model of kindness. But the truth is that I'm sure he had moments where he just like lost his shit. Like, how could you not? You're just a human being. And so humanizing our heroes and humanizing our villains, remembering that everybody has all these different elements inside of them is so important, not just to see reality as it is, right? Not just to like accept how reality works, but also for ourselves, because we do ourselves such a disservice. If we go down the road of having done enough mistakes, we might turn ourselves into villains. We might go, oh, I'm just a bad person that isn't capable of anything because look at all the mistakes I'm making. Or if we think that there's something in our past that will haunt us, we might stop ourselves from going into a position of leadership, even though we might be the right leader. We might be the best leader for the job, but we hold ourselves back because there's a skeleton in the closet. And I think this climate of going, well, you know, if you have a skeleton in the closet, well, maybe you shouldn't step into a position of leadership. I think that's bullshit, honestly. I mean, I have skeletons in my closet. I definitely do. And you know, ones that are kind of embarrassing because I was in a time period of my life where I was young and stupid and incredibly unhappy. And so I made decisions that were the emergent of that, you know, of that system running. Do I think that I should never step up for leadership? Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, maybe those skeletons are going to be something that takes me down. And then I think, yeah, but if I don't, who's the paragon of virtue who will? Like, is there somebody out there that has literally never done anything wrong in their entire lives? And do I want that person to be in a position of leadership when they're not able to sympathize with other people who have done things that are wrong? I kind of want my leader to have a skeleton in the closet because then they'll be able to sympathize with doing stupid crap sometimes. So I think this concept of imposter syndrome really does root back in some way. I mean, there's a couple different factors at play, of course, but one of them is that we just have the kind of an unrealistic version in our head of who we have to be able to be in a position of service to the rest of the world and to give our gifts to the world.
I wire myself a little differently than that. You look back, I think, and say there might be some skeletons. Am I qualified to step into leadership? And I actually look forward and say, okay, I'm stepping into leadership. That means I can't make any mistakes. I have to be very rigid. I can't take a risk. I can't make any mistake at all because it'll ruin all the credibility I have, and then I'll be an imposter at that point. So I think this can work both ways. It can work in reverse, where you look back and you go, well, I made mistakes in my past. Now I'm not qualified for leadership. I'm not qualified to be the person and give my gifts to the world. I feel like an imposter here. Or I don't feel like an imposter right this second, but I could at any moment if I make one big mistake, and it ruins everything I've built up till now. So I've got to I basically have to close my life down and stop living my life fully and vibrantly because I fear that any little thing might be perceived wrongly, or maybe I will make just a genuine mistake. I'll treat somebody poorly, or I'll get angry at the wrong person, or emote something in public that now ruins my credibility. Now, oh no, now I'm an imposter. Now I can't be in a leadership place because I just ruined it all for myself and the people that are dependent on me.
I was found out.
Exactly. And so I think it can rob you of this ability to take the risks and learn the things you need to learn, because you can't do it in a vacuum. You have to make the mistakes. You got to push forward. You've got to understand things about yourself, and the only way to do that is to take action. And sometimes those things don't work out so well, right? And again, we're not positing any kind of like illegal or misbehavior that would be really disgusting or smarmy or anything that would be treating other people poorly that you know is clearly not the right behavior. It's not about giving yourself license to do those kind of things, but it's just those little risks that you take that might be you're socially uncalibrated at the time, that people are like, whoa, dude, you can't do that like in public. What are you like? How are you being like this? That's not cool. It's like, oh no, now I've lost all credibility to be the leader I want to be.
Yeah, well, and I think the word that comes up for me when, you know, it's like we're not talking about people who've done like really bad stuff. The word predator always comes up for me.
Yes.
Like anytime somebody has predatory behavior, then I do think that somebody who evidences what's the word when you're sad about something you've done?
Remorse?
Right. Anybody who is an unremorseful predator, then that's a totally different conversation. Because predatory behavior is something like those are people who take actions designed to play a zero-sum game.
It's premeditated.
Yeah, it's premeditated, and even if it's opportunistic, it's always a zero-sum. It's I get and you lose. and I'll take at the cost of somebody losing everything. And so predators need not apply. You definitely are. If you're a predator, you are an imposter, because predators always put themselves in sheep's clothing, right? Like that's how they live. They live by being an imposter.
Well, that's the fear. I think we all fear that we're going to be conflated with that, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But if you're not a predator, if you're not seeing the world through the lens of a zero-sum game where other people must lose for you to gain, and that you'll take every opportunity to make that happen, then you're probably one of the 95% of other human beings on the planet that doesn't have something like kind of legitimately wrong with your wiring. Because predators generally, they had the initial conditions for maybe a personality disorder or for something like actually honestly missing from their wiring. And then usually it's combined with some sort of abuse past or something that, made the initial conditions like it sparked the flame. And now they're a person who should not be in any position of power. What to do with those people is on the table, but those positions of power should never be one of them. And we see that, right? We see when predators get in positions of power and then it just like literally alters the course of humanity and terrible things happen. Like you mentioned with Hitler, it's like, well, Hitler had a bit of a predator in him. Like he was totally willing to play a zero-sum game for his own benefit. And while that doesn't mean that he wasn't also a complex human being that should be seen from many sides, he should have never been in a position of power, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So when we're talking about predators, that's a little bit of a different conversation. But if you're like not a predator, if you're not somebody in that position, if you're just a person who's like, fucked up a couple times, which I think every human being has and will continue to do so. And I think we're actually talking about two different things too. I'm talking about things that are maybe ethically or socially ethically ambiguous. Like maybe was okay for one time period in history, and by okay I mean like society wouldn't have blinked, and then suddenly it's not okay. And the whole time it was ethically dubious, but the social wiring was not necessarily focused on it at the time. So I'm talking about things that are sort of morally and ethically on the table now. And you're talking about mistakes, right? Like you do something and it wasn't the right call, and it might not have anything to do with ethics, but it does have to do with result. So I'm kind of more talking about processes and you're talking about results. But I think both of them are things that can stop people from taking, from playing a bigger game. The fear that you've done things that are ethically or morally ambiguous, and the idea that you might make mistakes and that they might not have anything to do with ethics. They just will have bad results for people. It'll just not play out well. Both of those can lead to people having imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome can be defined multiple different ways. It can be defined as somebody who like legitimately has credentials in a field, but still feels like, they shouldn't have those credentials. Maybe they're a professional that's gone through, years of training or years of schooling, and they're a brain surgeon that like thinks they shouldn't be a brain surgeon or whatever. That's one form of imposter syndrome. But I think it's kind of been absorbed in the social consciousness is anytime you actually are qualified to do something, but you fear that you shouldn't. You fear that people are going to find out that you should never have done it in the first place. And most of us are qualified, at least to some extent, to be in a position of leadership, if nothing else, self-leading. And if you fear your ability to lead yourself, if you fear your ability to lead others, that's when you hand yourself over to other people. And my big question in imposter syndrome is, what makes you think not everybody else is an imposter? Like, what makes you the imposter, but everybody else has it together? Like, if you start handing your sovereignty over to other people because you're the person that everybody's going to discover was faking it the whole time, what makes you think that the other people aren't doing the exact same thing? So why hand your sovereignty over to somebody else who might be in the same boat and actually might be less qualified than you? Like, is just better at faking it than you are.
Man, that's so true. I think that, we put ourselves out there publicly with our podcast and in videos and all sorts of content we create, right? Articles, and we get a lot of feedback. And sometimes you get some negative feedback that, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I don't like what you're wearing. I don't like just weird, just random stuff, right? Different criticisms. Some are easier to, ignore and just be like, all right, that's somebody trolling, in the comments. But some, especially if they hit, near one of those things you might, like I have insecurity around, and I'm like, oh man, like really? That's how I'm coming off? And then you start to question, like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not designed to be in a leadership position and talking about the things about personal growth and stepping up to play a bigger game. Maybe that's not this person. Maybe they're right. And I start to fear, this is tough, man. This is tough to hear because they're really reflecting back to me some of my own insecurities. I think that's really tough. I think that's the other piece of this imposter syndrome is other people sometimes aren't going to cut you slack. And really it comes down to you inside of yourself. This sense of complete sovereignty, like you're talking about, Antonia, saying, you know what? Yeah, I might not have it all together. I might make mistakes. I might have some things that I'm not really even proud of in my past. I have some insecurities, and even the putting myself out there, people are setting me up to see those insecurities. They're giving me feedback that's pointing a light on those insecurities that I got to somehow feel through and get through. I only see it getting more intense. I see this idea of imposter syndrome as technology allows you, listening right now, you're here with us on this podcast, technology is going to allow you, for the first time in human history, to step into leadership and make an impact in ways that have never been possible before. You can instantly publish something, video, audio, text, photograph, and have it go global within seconds. That's never been the case in human history up until the last, couple decades. And now we're all able to put ourselves out there. And anybody that has an internet connection now has a voice, and they can come in and they can say something about, the way you look or what you say or your intent. They could question your very motives in the core of your heart, whether you're a good person. And if you have any insecurity around this, it's going to hit you hard. You're going to think, man, am I an imposter? Am I qualified to step up and say this? Am I qualified to put myself out there like this? Maybe I'm not. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't have what it takes. And this, I think, is going to be a lot of our work in personal growth and in stepping into thought leadership and you becoming a leader in your own right and stepping forward to say, hey, I want to make a difference in the world. One of the things you may not have had to face in the past as much was the chorus of voices that's going to come after you. And you're going to have bravery to get through this. I think that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take an internal sense of sovereignty, bravery, stick-to-itness, and realizing that your motives are good. Your intent is good. Your heart is pure. You have a vision for something that you want to bring to the world that's really, it's powerful, and the world needs it. And you can't let that stuff stop you because the world will miss out on something important if it does.
Well, and we have a lot of leadership vacuums. And the people who... And I say this as somebody who's had to get through a lot of being okay with negative feedback. Like, I think it hit me harder than it even hit you to read some of this negative feedback. And so I've had to sit with it for a couple of years. Like, there were times when I'm like, I don't want to do the podcast anymore. Like, it's just too much. Like, people's feedback that was negative, I was just like, oh, I can't do it. And then because I had to sit with it for so long, I had to make a lot of peace with it. And one of the major things that came up for me was the people who don't care about feedback don't care because, not everybody cares about some feedback, but the ones who are seem to be the best at it completely ignoring feedback are the ones who are less sympathetic with other people. They're dehumanizing the people who are giving them feedback, and that's why they're okay with it. And when they dehumanize them and they get in a position of leadership, they are now used to seeing those people as not humans. And are they the most qualified to be in a position of leadership? Do we want to allow all these leadership vacuums to be filled by people who are not particularly compassionate and don't care about feedback? So I thought, negative feedback hurts me almost every time. And also that's what I need to do in order to become a qualified leader. A qualified thought leader is somebody who cares about the feedback and keeps going anyway. That humanizes every person who gives feedback and goes, well, that's just part of what's, I'm going to have to accept it. I'm going to have to ask whether or not it's something that I should be calibrating against. And if it's something that I can improve upon, then I will. And if it's not, then I'm just going to have to eat it and keep going. And I think one of the challenges that I experience when I think about, every time I think about the imposter syndrome piece, which happens to me, late at night, I'll be laying on my pillow and I'm like, who the hell do I think I am? Why do I think people should be listening to me? Should I be saying these things that are coming out of my head? People are writing this shit down. Maybe I shouldn't be saying what's in my head. Who am I? I'm not qualified. And then I think, but somebody else equally unqualified is going to be talking. And do I want their thoughts to be out there, or do I like my thoughts better? And oftentimes I'm like, actually, I think I like my thoughts better. So there's going to be a vacuum anyway. I might as well fill it with thoughts that I think are somewhat higher quality in some ways. So the piece where if we don't do it, it's like if I don't do it, then somebody else is going to do it. And that person might be in the same position that I'm in. They might be just as unqualified as me, and they might be spouting more dangerous things. So I'm just going to spout the things that I spout, and then I'll let the world determine which one is more, is higher quality.
Yeah, I think it comes down to resonance. I think things resonate with other people. And I think so we need to wrap up here. We're running out of time. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome, if this is something that you're like, yeah, I don't know if I've got what it takes. When I put myself out there, people say stuff and they might be right. I want to be very clear. And this is something that I've had to learn, and I'm learning still. You are the only person that will be able to conquer this in your life. If you're still looking to the outside world to help you think, oh, okay, it's okay, I'm no longer an imposter. There is no group of people in a boardroom with rubber stamps, looking over applications of people that are wanting to do big things in the world, and they're stamping them approved, disapproved. There is this court of public opinion to some degree of getting traction in things. You can get elected, or you can get put into different positions. You can rise in leadership. So there are people that have to give their voices. But as far as feeling like an imposter or not feeling like an imposter, so I'm not talking the actual challenge of getting into a position of leadership or putting something out there in the world. The feeling of it, the only person that can get through the feeling of that is you. You're never going to get through that feeling looking to the outside, ever. It's never going to happen. I'm realizing this in my life, that I am going to be the only person that gets myself through this experience. And that goes for you too. And I think if we can realize that as humans, we'll get on with the work of doing the things we need to do and stop worrying so much about this piece, because we're going to realize, oh, I've got to figure out how to give this to myself. I am that little boardroom with the rubber stamp that rubber stamps my application to say, yep, I'm qualified for doing big stuff in the world because I deem it so.
Yeah, and getting through all of that means that you will have to work on your ego. The more ego work you do, the more you accept those missiles and realize it's actually not about you anyway. It's more about the service you're rendering. Then, like if you rise and fall and your message was good and you rise and fall, then it kind of didn't matter who you were to begin with. You were just the messenger. So be brave and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And get the message out, and then be okay with whatever happens to you. Because it wasn't really about you anyway. It was about the service you rendered.
That's right. So what do you think? You've been here with us on this podcast. I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. You can leave a comment or ask a question. Leave your feedback about what your experience is with imposter syndrome right below this podcast on our website. And I think it's important that your voice is represented. I think you need to be part of this discussion. In fact, I want your voice represented so much. I want to invite you to come over to our community of like minds, very similar to you. People that are thinking like you, they want to grow themselves. They're interested in personality types, but they also want to understand how their personality type can be used to bring their passion, their purpose, and their mission into the world. Come over to facebook.com/personalityhacker, or you can also find us at twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.